Okay, Dr. Mike, so we just covered pornography and its place in our current culture. Now I'd love to get into some of the questions around healthy sexuality. So, do you care to just start us off by letting us know your vision for healthy sexuality?
Yeah, this is the area that I love to talk about most. For much of history, I think the church has really been about don't. The primary message is what we shouldn't do. Don't have sex before marriage. Don't have sex outside of marriage. Don't do these behaviors or practices. And so much of the message has been one of shutting down. And it's not that that's a bad message, because there are things that Scripture says aren't okay to do. But if that's all we focus on, we miss the vision. We miss the beauty of what God has crafted it to be. So if we take a look at what healthy sexuality is, first off, healthy sexuality is good. And don't miss what that means. It means it's of God. And so it's going to be reflective of who God is. And in part, sex is about the spirit of the act. It's about the nature of us coming together and creating intimacy and oneness. It's also about the body of the act, because God is both spirit and Christ is spirit and body. It's about the body of the act and the sensuality of it. And we're designed to feel good in it. We're designed to enjoy just the sensual pleasure of it. And I think it's important to teach both those aspects, pursuing the spirit of it and pursuing the body of it. That it's sacred means that it's set aside for a very specific purpose. And that purpose is to help to draw a husband and wife closely together. It ties us, it binds us, it glues us together in ways that we're still learning in science how that happens. And that's part of what's good in it.
Real quick follow up though. You said it's good, healthy sexuality is good for the marriage. So, could you tell me, like, what does healthy sexuality look like for the premarital couple?
Healthy sexuality within marriage takes great discipline, and the before marriage is kind of the training ground for that. How do we take the desires, how do we take the urges that are God-given, that are good within us, and not give them license, but not repress them? Both of those are unhealthy for us. How do we learn to discipline them? And if we don't learn that before the wedding, it's much more difficult, doable, but more difficult to learn it within marriage.
Okay.
So it's helping couples to talk to each other about what their boundaries are, how to not shut it down and squash it, but not to give it license, but learn to discipline their sexuality.
So that's great, Mike. So help me understand, how do you encourage couples to practice discipline? I mean, every couple is asking, or they want to know how far is too far. What do you tell them?
I think the first thing is to embrace the desire. Desire is good.
Okay.
To want to connect, that's God-given. But we do have to discipline it. We have to bring it in within certain boundaries. But if the focus is on the yeses and the nos, if the focus is on the law, we tend to get off track. If we use food as an example, a desire for food is a good thing. But if my diet is focused on what I can and can't eat, I begin to resent the list, and I start to cheat on the list instead of staying focused on eating healthy, instead of focused on what this is going to get me. So we paint a healthy vision for the couple, and then we teach them to discipline it, which is not repressing their desire, but not giving full license to the desire. Okay, practically, what does that look like? That looks like each individual sitting down and starting to figure out, where are those boundaries for me? What allows me to continue to get to know you, to continue to get to know me? And where would those boundaries fit? I tell couples, I think the principle is our physical relationship has to follow our heart commitment.
Okay.
So I'm not going to behave with you in a physical way that outpaces the commitment that I'm ready to make to you. One book called Soul Virgins by Doug Rosenau and Michael Todd Wilson presents a bridge model that helps people to think through, where is my commitment to you, and is the physical touch following that? And for example, one of the principles that they give is any orgasmic focus kind of touch really needs to be reserved for a covenantal relationship. Any arousal type of touch is reserved for a committed relationship.
Right.
And those kind of boundaries can help couples when I'm focused on making the marital relationship really rich and good and protecting it.
That's awesome. You know what else is awesome, Dr. Mike? The fact that you can say orgasm or orgasmic without laughing or snickering,
Yeah,
I
it
still
comes
can't
with
do
years
that.
of experience.
Yeah, in all seriousness, I'm going to keep peppering you, especially with the premarital couples. So
Yep.
we got a lot of couples, looking for premarital advice, many of which who are having sex. How would you help them navigate this discipline ethic? Like, what would you say to that?
Yeah, because we don't want to shame somebody for what they're doing, but
Okay.
help them to challenge them. So it starts by just having a conversation. What does this mean to you, and are you okay with it? And then I'll often look at them and say, oh, have you ever disciplined your sexuality? And many of the couples that come in have never said no to themselves sexually. And my question is, if you've never done that, how do you know you're going to be able to practice discipline in marriage? How do you know that the person you're committing to is going to be able to be disciplined sexually in marriage? Is there something we can do now that helps you to discipline it without repressing it? And that's part of the challenge, because sometimes when we invite couples to start to discipline their sexuality before marriage, they just flip the switch off. And they squash the desire, and they go to not doing anything, and that's really not healthy. It's actually counterproductive for them as a relationship. But engaging them in a conversation of how can we help to discipline your sexuality, to appreciate the desire, but to put it within certain boundaries.
So, with that thought, discipline is obviously helpful, beneficial for the couple who's about to get married. We got a lot of couples coming to us for premarital advice. A lot of which are still living together, and most of which are still having sex or having sex. How would you help us help them navigate this idea of a discipline ethic for them?
Right. I think I think it starts by just exploring it with them. What does it mean? What is the role that it plays in their life? Are they able to discipline themselves in their sexuality? Are there ever times that they just engage in heart-to-heart conversation? Are there times that they just enjoy each other physically? Can they draw some boundaries and practice being together without it having to be about having an orgasm, without it having to be about the rush of being together? Because much of their married life is going to be just being together. So I think it's just exploring it with them and helping to find some meaning, not repressing it, not shutting it down, not giving it full license, but helping them to figure out where that middle line would be for their relationship.
Okay, that's great. So, what I hear you say is discipline is super important for the couple who's about to get married.
Correct.
But what about the couple who was already married? Like, what else do they need to know? With this concept of discipline.
Well, discipline is important in all areas of marriage. We have to learn how to discipline our finances. We have to learn how to discipline ourselves in our parenting. We have to learn how to discipline ourselves in the roles that we do, who does what around the house.
Right.
And I discipline myself to do things that I may not want to do because it still needs to be done. There are a lot of ways we bring in discipline, and that's especially true in our sexuality. Because I may need to discipline myself to make it about the spirit of the act. I may need to discipline myself to woo my wife from the morning and not just expect her to be ready because I'm ready. And that takes discipline for many guys. It may be that I have to think ahead and discipline myself to figure out what does she like, and discipline myself to lean in and understand her and pursue her heart. It may be that the lower desire individual needs to discipline themselves to prep themselves to be ready, or to be more open, to be more receptive. There's a lot of ways that we discipline ourselves. That something else is not able to distract me. I'm only focused on my wife. That pornography, or the guy who really did care for me in the office today, or the woman who walked by. I keep my mind focused only on my spouse. They're the only place that I receive that fulfillment. That takes discipline within marriage, and we have to continually practice it and develop it.
Okay, so basically, once I get disciplined down, like, I'm good. I'm a rock star marriage. I'm gonna have a vibrant sex life. From here until we grow old together. That's it, right? So
Yeah, discipline is obviously a critical part of it, but that's not all of it.
Okay.
The other part that really we develop more after is that of discovery. So we learn discipline predominantly before the wedding, and we continue to practice it afterwards. We do some discovery before, but after the wedding is where we get to really lean in and discover. And we learn to discover what it is about ourselves, what awakens us, what allows us to connect powerfully and deeply to our spouse, and what is it about them? You know, how do I seduce? How do I entice? How do I draw them to me? What makes my wife tick? What makes my husband get really excited? What allows us to continually awaken for each other? And as the marriage goes on, that doesn't end. As we continue to shift and as we continue to grow, we still lean in and we discover more about each other and about how to make it rich and not just routine. That discovery process is what's cool and is given to us and awakened after the wedding.
Okay, so Dr. Mike, help me with this. So you mentioned discovery. So what do you say to like the couple who they're in that discovery mode and they figure out, well, what if we like different things?
But most couples will. That is part of the beauty of it. In fact, the number one thing that we find is most couples learn, or all couples learn, that they have differing levels of desire, differing levels of drive. So what we point out is that is just normal. 51% of the couples that we talk to say that their desire discrepancy, the number of times that they want to engage sexually, is different enough that they've considered talking to a professional about it. So it's causing a lot of distress in them, but that's common. And so we invite couples to lean in and discover each other, to explore that arena for them. So we tell them, you know, it's normal for it to be different, that sexual desire is extremely complex. Our society is all about finding a pill or finding a cream or finding something that can make your desire the way I want it to be, or that I can make my desire to be what I think it should be. And we're learning it just doesn't work. It's way too complex. Our desire comes from the connection that we have as a couple. It comes from what's going on in my body. It comes from a host of different things. So understanding that complexity means we're always seeking to discover what helps to awaken it, what helps to make it work. So another thing is that it's really varied from individual to individual, from spouse to spouse. That 80% of the time, the husband tends to be the higher drive kind of an individual. But that means that 1 in 5 couples, she tends to be the higher drive. She's thinking about it more often, and encouraging the couple just to discover how are they as a couple. And then why is he looking for it more often, and why is she not? Because the stories we often create to explain our spouse aren't all that helpful many times. We find that typically for men, they've been thinking about it several times during the day, and so they tend to be more the initiator of it. So for most men, the sexual desire happens before they even engage in the act. We find that for most women, it doesn't work that way. She might not have thought about it for 3 days. Or if she thought about it, it's, well, we probably should. And I tell them that's legitimate desire, that I want to be that kind of a person. And then they tend to be more receptive to it. So he comes in and says, you know, can we be together? I'd love to spend some time with you. And she chooses to engage in it. She is not hungry for it at this point. But once they begin to get engaged, what we found is normal is that her desire wakens up once they've started to get engaged. And so we talk about the difference between an initiating desire and a receptive desire. That one spouse tends to be the initiator of the process. The other one isn't hungry for it until they're about 5 to 10 minutes into it. And to let them know that's normal. How can we lean in and discover, oh, this is how you work? How do we put some discipline and some balance to it so I don't feel like I'm always, you know, being pressured into something? Right. And allowing them to discover that piece of it is an important part of the discussion on desire.
So rich. Thank you for that. So I'm sitting here thinking, Dr. Mike, hypothetical, okay? Let's say there was a guy, all right, who was currently interviewing a certified sex therapist. Okay, just completely hypothetical.
Just totally.
And let's say that guy was curious to know what he could go home and do tonight to discover something new about his wife. And I'm just going to write some random things
Just some ideas.
for this guy.
For most couples that come to see me, they have not had a conversation about it. They haven't really started to discover each other in communication. They've tried some things, but they've not really talked about it. So the goal, and I think the best tactic is to start talking about it. The problem is that's really scary for most couples. How do I engage in this conversation in a way that draws you out? So my favorite exercise for people is to get a good book on healthy sexuality, something that is focused on, here's the goal. To sit down in bed and start reading it out loud to each other. So he opens it up and he just starts reading. And I tell them the goal is not to get to the end of the book. The goal is to read a couple of paragraphs and then stop and go, what do you think? This author is saying this about sex. I don't think that works for me. Does it work for you? And the book gives us some language to start to use. It gives us a topic to start to talk about, and then be open to each other's influence. Be curious about each other. Really? You work that way? You think that way? And rather than telling them how to be and how to think and how to behave sexually, truly be curious and discovering, really, you're like that. You think that. Wow, that's cool. That's fascinating. So how can I help with it? And that kind of discussion will really help to open up the couple and allow them to draw closer and be more and more successful in this arena.
Yeah. Well, that's going to help me, when I go home tonight, and hang out with my wife. But on the flip side of that, obviously that's me trying to discover more about her. What is something maybe she, as my wife, as my bride, could discover about me? How can we get into that conversation?
The same thing, though, as you guys begin to engage back and forth with each other. So, I had a couple that were doing this exercise, and they're reading a book. And in the book, it was describing something about women. And the husband's reading it, and he paused and he went, oh, this is crazy. This author has totally got it wrong. Nobody is like this, right? And he looked at his wife, and his wife's looking at him and says, what do you mean nobody's like that? It perfectly describes me. What are you like? And her leaning back in and saying, okay, what does that mean for you that you're not like this? Right. So it's that mutual discovery of each other that invites them into talking.
I love that. Well, Dr. Mike, we are so grateful that you have given us your time and your expertise to help us navigate these conversations of pornography and culture, but also healthy sexuality and discipline and discovery. And we are better because of you. And so on behalf of the mentors and the leaders in the room, thank you.
Well, thank you, but it's truly an honor to do this. The church has some really great people who serve as mentors, who serve as leaders. They pour into the lives of people. This is what it's about. It's about people going before and inviting people into the conversations, and they do so well with it. They come into my office, have already been poured into, and makes my job that much easier. So to be able to give back, I really honor what they do. So it's an honor to speak to them and to help.
Well, thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.